You are listening to the IFH Podcast Network. For more amazing filmmaking and screenwriting podcasts, just go to ifhpodcastnetwork.com.
Welcome to the Successful Screenwriter Podcast, where we discuss anything and everything screenwriting. Here we interview successful screenwriters and filmmakers to find out just what it takes to make it in the industry. Welcome to the podcast. We have on an amazing guest today, screenwriting guru, author of Making a Good Script Great, and the legend herself, Linda Seger. Linda, thanks for being on with us today.
Sure. Lovely to be here.
Well, before we get started, before we really roll into this, I wanted to first thank you for being a trailblazer for script consultants. You had done this for over 20 years, and if it wasn't for you, people like me wouldn't exist.
Yes, and it was 39 years.
Wow. We're going to discuss the book today, Making a Good Script Great, because this is really in the pantheon of screenwriting books. It's up there with Story, Save the Cat, Screenplay up there. This book really should be in every screenwriter's collection. Before we really kind of dive into the book, I always like to get people's origin story real quick. So do you think you could kind of guide me into like how everything started for you?
Sure. Well, I came out of theater and I got a master's degree. I directed about 25 plays and went to graduate school. And in graduate school, I did a dissertation for my doctorate on what are the elements that make a great script. And when I entered the film industry, I saw scripts that weren't great. And so I flipped my dissertation into what is missing from these scripts. And then decided when I discovered that Hollywood tended to be anti-education. And the only way I could get a job was to sell myself and my typing ability. I was a really good typist. And then eventually, after a few years, said, I wonder if I could create a business on this. Wow. So I went to a career consultant and got it started in 1981. And then it went full-time in 1983.
Absolutely amazing. So you wrote the book, and I was going over it the other day again, and you talk about the 5 components of a story, and those would be storylines, characters, theme, idea, and these are all wonderful. And then you land on something that I don't think anybody really talks about as much as they should, and that is images.
Yes.
And how a scene builds an image. And I love the way you described it because you really don't find that anywhere. I was wondering if you could just kind of walk us through that a little bit more.
Well, film is a visual medium, and sometimes people think it's a word medium, and so they overwrite dialogue and they get very much on the nose. They have a message that they hammer away. And in film, you can do an image very, very quickly. So in 1 second, you get an image.
Yeah.
I mean, look what's behind me is Christmas time.
Yeah.
And the book, and also
and the book is right there.
Me. And so you immediately get some sense of who I am, who a character is, by both the story and by, little things around the character that immediately give you a clue. And so you learn to be a visual thinker, and that is something you can learn. I spent 2 years in graduate school doing visual thinking exercises to learn to think in images.
Oh, wow. That's absolutely a brilliant technique for any screenwriter to do, is to teach themselves to think visually. And one thing you wrote in the book that's always kind of sat with me is that the mind can interpret the visual way faster than it can through dialogue. So it takes longer for the mind to understand what the dialogue is going on. And as well, especially if there is voiceover in the beginning of a film to kind of explain a world. You mentioned how, well, you should just be showing the world with minimum dialogue. And I think that is just great advice.
Yeah, many times the idea is to start your movie with an image that immediately brings us into it. And now these can become the cliche, Paris, Eiffel Tower,
Right.
and you might decide to try something a little different, but you want that immediate sense of, oh, now I know where I am, I'm oriented, and you don't have to talk about it.
Right.
Voiceovers tend to do that a lot. I generally don't like them. I think they're a crutch, but there are times that they are very effective. And so that's one of the things you learn is, when do I use that? And when do I just really think through my images more directly?
I love this idea. One thing I always think about when it comes to voiceover, and you actually mentioned this in the book, and I thought it was great, was, you're establishing that world, and if you have to use voiceover, and you use the example of Lord of the Rings. And I thought that was brilliant, because in Lord of the Rings, they introduce you through a foreign language, and you go, so right away, you already know you're in a whole different world, in a whole different land with a new language. And I'm like, I didn't even interpret that watching the film, but now seeing you analyze it that way, it makes total sense. One thing I have an issue with when I deal with my own clients is rewriting, and you're obviously a master of rewrites. When I have to work with a client who's rewriting a script, one of the biggest things I find is that the script kind of goes nowhere in what I've ended up calling a series of scenes, because I couldn't come up with I couldn't find a term for it, but basically the scenes are nonsensical. They're just a bunch of random scenes put together, and then there's an ending. And I wonder if that is something you've ever had to deal with.
Well, that's why in Making a Good Script Great, I talk about scene sequences. And I think I might be the only person who's really talking about this, that you think of scenes as action, reaction, action, reaction. And so you get the scenes put together, and they often are put together with a beginning, middle, and end.
Right.
Particularly these scene sequences, like a car chase. You can create that car chase in 3 acts. They turn a corner, and now the police are there after them, whereas they were on their own in Act 1 of the scene sequence. And actually, Ron Howard said that is one of the things that he got out of Making a Good Script that he has used in so many of his films. As you think of the sequence of scenes, not the episodes, because it's really easy to fall into arbitrary episodes, and pretty soon everything is in there. So, and you're looking at the cohesive whole, sort of what's the magnet that holds the scenes together? Yeah. Why is that scene there? Why is it important? If you could take it out and you don't need it, then you may as well take it out.
Right, just cut it. So you're looking at doing a scene and giving a scene a beginning, a middle, and an end, basically like a 3-act structure within the scene itself.
Yeah, you're often not always. I mean, there's some scenes that are just there to transition or to move the story. But the sequence of scenes say it's a series of scenes in different locations that are all connected and have a beginning, middle, and end, leading to a climax.
Yeah, that's next level. It's brilliant. So one thing I have found working with these scripts that kind of aren't going anywhere is what I found is a lack of theme, and that the writer has a great concept. They have a great idea of what they want it to be about, but they don't know what the theme is, so they don't know what they're trying to say with it. And I know theme is exceptionally important in your model, and I was wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I got very interested in theme because when I was in college, I got interested in value systems. And I said, what are we trying to communicate in drama? What are we saying about the human condition, about what's important in life, what's the meaning of life, and how do we say it without giving a sermon or a lecture? So I began to think about what are the important themes and ideas that we see over and over again. One of the most important in film is the theme of identity.
Okay.
Just who am I? Who am I becoming? Who am I transforming into? Am I becoming a more committed person, a more truthful person, a person of integrity? Am I standing up for my integrity?
Right.
And I began to see about 90% of all movies have something to say about identity.
Wow.
So if you start there, you say, well, what is this movie saying? Or what's my script saying about identity? And then you can get much more specific about, what it is.
Yeah.
But I went to, part of my graduate school was seminary. So my doctorate is actually in drama and theology at a seminary, which is one of the few in the world that has a religion in the art section in Berkeley in the 70s. So, and I went to seminary because I couldn't find what I was trying to find about exploring this idea by continuing. I mean, my MA in drama is from Northwestern. And I thought, well, I'm interested in theology. Let's see if seminary would help. And I found my major professor was brilliant in how he approached this. And I didn't want to approach it through religious drama. I wanted to approach it through drama, secular drama, that communicated values without hammering. I was not interested in converting people. I was interested in exploring and expressing the human condition.
I'm just blown away by that because it makes total sense to me. I've interviewed a lot of people, and I found that the great screenwriters, they are fascinated in the human experience. So the fact that you mastered in theology, it makes total sense to me. I find screenwriters that go the next level, they're deep into psychology. They want to know how people work. They want to know why people do the things they do. And I think they express it through their work, partly because they're trying to figure it out themselves.
Well, I will say a master's and doctorate in drama and theology is the least marketable degree you could ever get. No one is going to hire you with that. So the only way I could get a job was I had to take all my degrees except my BA in English off my resume.
Really?
Yes. And no college or university would hire me. Well, one of the problems was there are stereotypes about both of these. So religious people thought I must be outrageous because of that drama part. Drama people thought I must be rigid because of the religious part. No one even wanted to interview me. And in a way, by following that path that I got so interested in, I was following a path where clearly my career was going to have to follow a path that was highly unusual. I was going to have to create myself because it didn't fit any place. And, it's hard to create something new that people say I don't need and I'd never come to you anyway. And that's why I found this terrific career consultant. And I said, how do we do this? And she said, okay, we have a 5-month plan, and it worked.
That's amazing. Well, I mean, great screenwriters are seekers. I really believe this. And you're living proof of that. And then you were able to take all this knowledge you've learned and put it into a brilliant book, and make that available for everybody, which is something that screenwriters that are able to reach that level need to be doing to really help the community. And I think it's absolutely wonderful. One thing I have found with scripts that are struggling is that there's a lack of a central question, as you call it. And I love the way you put that, like, what are we trying to say? And that's central question is different than the theme. Would you say that the central question is influenced by the theme?
Yes, but it's probably more related by story. And I learned this idea. I took a film directing class many, many years ago. And not because I wanted to be a director, but because I was trying to really understand how film is put together to make me a better script consultant. And this person, who I don't remember his name because it was 40 years ago, talked about the central question. He said, it's the question you ask at the beginning of a story and the story answers it. So will the detective get the criminal who committed this crime?
Got you.
The end is yes. Well, now we're going to follow that, and it helps you stay on track. And you keep, you move down, you say, okay, how is he going to do it? And the how is the second act. Or will the woman find the love of her life? Will they actually move to Italy and decide to accept the mansion that they've inherited? I mean, whatever that story is, because it's so easy when you write to start going all over the place. So the central question, as well as the theme, they have a relationship. But the central question is more about the story beats and the plot.
That makes sense. And so it's more implied. You don't actually have characters stating what their central question is, correct?
But most of the time you don't. Sometimes you do have somebody saying, I'm going to go for that boxing match and I'm going to win it.
Okay. All right.
And so sometimes they will. And so in your mind, you're saying, will this character win the boxing match?
Right.
The answer is, yes, or at least he'll tie.
Right. Exactly. But it's not a hard, fast rule that they need to state it. All right. That's good.
No.
Let's talk about subplots. Because I'm a bit of a subplot guy myself. I actually wrote a book that has subplots, and I show where they intermingle with the main plot. And I love that you cover subplots as well, because no one else talks about it. And
I think that's true. I haven't seen very many people talk about subplots.
No, they don't. And so I talk about three different subplots. Your supporting subplot, the heart plot, and the antagonist as a subplot. Mm-hmm. So I want to know, when did you stumble on subplots? Because you don't really find it anywhere. And how did you kind of start realizing this is what scripts need?
I think maybe when I really began consulting and began breaking down, because the method I used was actually was like a graph, and I color coded all the plot lines. And
really?
Sudden,
that's a good idea.
I developed this method so you visually could see what that script looked like. You could, lay it out and visualize the whole script. And I had little marks for conflict points and momentum, and I had all these different color codes, which sometimes people would look and say, are you kidding? And then they looked more carefully. They said, that really helps me understand. My green dropped out for 50 pages. Yeah, the green was your subplot story. And I think it was this method of color coding that made me aware of how these storylines intersected and where they went and how they built and how they were structured. And so by the time I wrote Making a Good Script Great, which was about 1987, I was writing it, I had really worked a lot with that.
Developed it, yeah. One thing I find when I get scripts from clients is they'll be really light. So they'll come in maybe 70 pages, maybe 60 pages. And that's when I started realizing, because it's all main plot. It's all A plot.
Yes.
And I started thinking, okay, we need to start bringing in subplots. And then I started going, okay, what are subplots? And start figuring it out. And I think that is one thing, is that writers can get lost on just trying to tell the main story. And they don't realize that you can use the subplots as ways to support the theme, or even be like an antithesis to the theme, right?
Yeah, because I see the plot as the direction and the subplots are the dimension, but they also have to influence and relate to the plot line. I had a rather famous client many years ago, had written one of those films that everybody knows. And she came to me because she was so stuck. And I said, you're so overburdened with subplots, you don't have that directional story. She did not want to hear that. She said, well, I'm most interested in subplots. And I said, yes, most writers are, because they're more dimensional, but without that forward motion. And one of the movies I sometimes use as an example is Stand By Me.
Right.
If they were not searching for the dead body, which is your directional story, all you'd have is boys wandering around in the woods.
Yeah.
So even if that directional story is less screen time than the dimensional stories, you don't want to lose it. You just, keep going. It's like the Titanic better crash. and because if there's not something, otherwise you're just on a cruise to New York, and it's a no big thing. And if you notice, this crash is actually happening in Act 2. I think it's at the midpoint in that case. But you have a lot of things layered in about this ship is unsinkable and is this great. And of course, we all know the Titanic story. And, we know when we see this. My cousin was once standing in line for a movie, and she didn't realize that James Cameron, who did Titanic, was behind her. And they got to talking, and something came up about the Titanic. And Miriam said to him, "I don't know, I'd want to go see that. I know the ending." And then she said, "I realized this is Jim Cameron behind me." I go, "No."
That's hysterical. Oh, that's great. All right. So with subplots, one thing I found is it's a great way to develop intercharacter relationships, of course, but also a way to reveal more layers and depth of your central character.
Yes. And even sometimes your other more supporting characters who might be carrying the theme even more than your central character.
Yeah. So there's just so much depth you can do supporting characters. Now, you had mentioned Midpoint, and the really interesting thing in your book, because I had never seen this before, is that you're not sold that every script has a midpoint, correct?
I have looked for it in some of what I consider really great films, and I don't always see it. This concept came from Sid Field. And the way he used it was he divided the whole script in half. The way I used it was I divided the second act in half.
Right.
So usually there's a different dynamic. The first half might be lots and lots of trouble, then it gets smooth, or lots of smooth, then it gets trouble. And that's one easy way to
like an Act 2A and an Act 2B type of a thing.
Yes, and I found it more helpful for writers to divide it that way, because that second act gets so unwieldy.
Yeah,
that using that midpoint. But I have felt like one of my favorite films is Witness. I can't tell you what the midpoint is, and I know that film really well. I knew Bill Kelly, who died some years ago, and I know Pamela Wallace, and just can't find. And sometimes people say to me, "Why do you love that film so much?" Besides the fact it's probably one of the best
it's Witness
films ever. Yes, but my husband proposed to me in the middle of the barn raising scene.
Aww.
So of course I love it.
Yeah, of course. You're a little biased.
Middle of it, he turns over and he says,
that's
"Well,
beautiful.
when we get married?" And I said, it had never been when, it was always if, and suddenly it was when. And so I said, "Oh, good. It's very special." But I had gotten to know Bill a bit, and then later Pamela, and Bill was quite a character, and a character in himself. And I really liked him. It's not like we were close friends, but we did occasionally have lunches together. So.
Oh, wow. Well, I mean, it's an interesting take to split it in half. I have to agree with you. I found most writers I've worked with that haven't really utilized subplots properly, they crash at like page 45 in a script.
Yeah.
They get like mid-act 2 and then it just spirals because I think Act 2 is the make or break on whether or not you've developed your script or not. If you've developed it enough, you can get through it.
Yeah, and that's the hardest thing for writers. You got to keep going and you say, I have to keep this act going twice as long as my Act 1 or Act 3. often Act 3 is the easiest because you're moving toward a culmination and you know what that point
Yes,
is.
I agree.
Act 2 is you start to dally. I have this thing, don't dally. You know, and definitely do not dally in Act 3. So, and that's where the midpoint can be very helpful because you have a halfway mark. You're,
right.
you know, it's like going from Los Angeles to Chicago and you hit Omaha. Say, oh, wow.
Yeah, over here in Detroit, it's
Good.
like trying to drive through. It's like trying to drive through Ohio. It's just Ohio never ends. So,
Yes, yeah.
I believe that anybody can write an Act 1. Like Act 1 is the easiest. It's the most fun because you're discovering the characters and establishing the world. But then after Act 1, that's when being a screenwriter really hits you. And I totally agree. Like Act 3, it almost writes itself sometimes.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know where you're going.
Yeah.
And you just have to get there. But sometimes people get there too fast. So you need about that 18 or 20 pages for Act 3. It needs to, you know, I mean, if you're there in 2 minutes, that's no fun.
Right.
You got to get them in the motel and the gun's coming and then the police come from all directions and then there's a problem.
Yeah.
You know,
well,
so.
Well, let's talk about pacing then, because I think a lot of scripts suffer from a deficiency in pacing. They'll take too long setting it up. They won't have the characters being active. The characters will be reactive to the story, so the story's kind of happening around them. What do you think?
Well, that's where structure really helps you. So even though I don't believe in hard and fast rules, although it's not a bad idea for new writers to really learn the rules and some of what we call the rules, you know. So you generally have about 15 pages to set up your story and to get to the catalyst, is what I call it, that
right.
moment that really moves you from the context to the story.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to get to your first turning point around 30 minutes in, 30 pages. You want your third act to be about 20 pages long. And you can start going in there and saying, oh, I see, I'm not developing this enough, or I'm just wandering.
Yeah.
And that's where a script consultant helps so much, because that objective professional eye helps you see, oh, wait, this you can extend. Look at you imply a lot of interesting things. You're just not playing them out.
Yeah.
Or you're overplaying them. Now, look, what if we were to cut these 3 pages? Look how that moves so much better.
I love that. I always preach to, because especially in today's audience, attention spans have shrunk, have decreased. I can say it's safe to say. So now I say, keep it 3 pages or less with a scene. I think.
Yeah, most of the time, that's what I think. That's a good kind of a guide. And sometimes a scene moves, and you say, "Well, I have 3 pages when people enter the party, and then I have, you know, some pages when they're going around meeting people, and then I have the end of the party." And so you might have more than that, but maybe you only have 2 or 3 pages in one location as people move from one thing to another.
Of that sequence of scenes. Yeah.
And also what you're talking about, there's a lot to learn about screenwriting. There's a tendency to think, oh, it just kind of rolls off, you know, and you say, you know,
it's easy. Anybody can do it, right?
Yeah, like ballet is to say, you just get up there and fly through the air. Like, no, you don't. And every art form has preparation and learning and knowledge. And the more you know, the more you can pull from in order to solve the problems that are part of the artistic process. What's my problem I have to fix or solve here? Let me think about it. I got lots of stuff. I can remember past movies. I can remember what I learned in a book. Oh, yeah. You know, you're pulling from various areas to solve this problem. And I think we need to take that seriously.
I agree.
That's why there's books and seminars and screenplays and consultants. And I mean, that's what
we do, like we problem solve. And I think one of the maybe issues of why anybody thinks they can do it is, I think screenwriting software, as much as it is a blessing, can be a bit of a curse, because anybody can sit down, right, and write
Yeah.
a screenplay. So they think, okay, well, what do you know? Well, I mean, you've got
Yes.
30 plus years in the industry, right? So
Yep. Yeah.
you're
You
paying
learn,
more for the experience.
and you learn a lot. I mean, even through the years, I learned a lot by watching films that were doing something I hadn't seen before. And
Yeah.
whether that was Pulp Fiction or Crash, or, some of these really unusual films. And so what are they doing, and how did they make that work? And I don't
That's
know if you
good.
know that I now have what's called Sager notes. Or remember the Cliff Notes?
Yeah.
Cliff Notes that we all used in
Yeah.
college and high school. Okay, these are Sager notes, and every month I take another great film, and they're 4,000 to 5,000 words. So they're
Awesome.
like an article you can do in one sitting. So I just finished the 7th one for 2020. And if you just look up Sager notes, they're published by a company called Twice Five. Think of 10, but then say Twice Five publishers. Yeah. And one of the people is John Huston's daughter, Allegra.
This podcast is brought to you by thesuccessfulscreenwriter.com, where you can find instructional books, videos, courses, and screenplays of Hollywood's biggest hits to download. As an added bonus, visit www.thesuccessfulscreenwriter.com to download the Guide for Every Screenwriter for free. Yes, free. Available exclusively at thesuccessfulscreenwriter.com. Now, back to our show.
We've just had a lovely relationship. We started these in June, and I just finished the last one for this year.
And these are breakdowns in films?
Yeah, I've done Jojo Rabbit, and
I love
some
that
classics.
film.
I did African Queen and Some Like It Hot. Then I did Tootsie, because I wanted to put those two together and see their relationship. And each of them deals with something that is helpful for the writer to learn. So some of them deal more with themes, some of them deal more with structure.
Are these are books that are they're online articles?
No, they're articles. They're very cheap, $5 each. And there's going to be certain discounts if you buy all 7 or all.
No, that's fan. I mean,
that's whatever.
Awesome.
And but they really were this idea I've had for many years of doing like the Cliff Notes, but doing them on film. And I'm hoping they're going to be used in screenwriting classes, but as well as by screenwriters and sometimes people just interested in the film to say, that was my favorite film. So they've been fun for me to do, and more, they're more handleable than doing a whole book.
I think that's, well, one, I can't wait to read them because I'm a geek about this stuff. But, I preach to writers, be the forever student, because this is a lifelong craft and an art. This is something that you dedicate your life to. This isn't just something that you write a script real quick and then you're done. I mean, you've been doing this for a long time. Yes. And I still see the passion that you have for it. And I still see the fact that you're a master at this, a legend. You've got over 9 books written on
I have
it.
10 on screenwriting, and then 6 on spirituality, and then additions. So it comes out to 25 if you count all the additions.
I'm behind the times. I apologize. and you're still passionate about this. You're still putting out articles on screenwriting, books on screenwriting, and that's what it needs in yourself to be great at it. And I just you're such an inspiration, Linda. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. And I'm so glad that there are people like you out there who are continuing to consult, because it was a job I created, and I said, I hope this job keeps going, script consulting. It's a very important job, and there was a lot of resistance when I started the business and the career. Yeah. And it's very different now than it was in the 1980s.
I try and really bring a mentorship capacity to the consulting. So it's not, for me, it's not just how do I make the project better? Because I always want to add value to a project, but how do I help you as a writer as well? Because I find that's one of the things I can really do. Because there's consultants out there that just, they're not qualified and they call themselves one, but I always want to try and honor what we do because it is so important, because you hold influence on someone. And if you're going to hold a kind of an influence, you want to make sure you're doing it in at least from my perspective, the most benevolent way possible.
Yeah, I say we nurture creativity, and that we are there to be a professional, objective eye, because writers get too close. They're too subjective. And also because we have learned a lot that a first time, even somebody who's written 10 scripts might not know, like, here's the concept that's going to help you through this problem you're encountering in Act 2. And they say, oh, yeah. And I started doing this. I volunteered to help somebody I met who said, I've spent 5 years, I don't know what's wrong with my script. And he said, let me try taking my doctoral dissertation graphic analysis, way of analyzing your script, and let's see if I could figure it out. And when we sat down together, he says, I can't believe this. He said, in 1 hour, I know exactly what to do with my script after 5 years. And that's when I started my business.
That's such a good feeling. I love that you mentioned objective, because I think that gets lost in a lot of in the consulting business. I hate to say it that way, but there are consultants out there that aren't as I can say qualified, and they'll use what I call the I feel notes, where I feel that, and I always say, I don't care how you feel.
Right.
Tell me what's wrong with it.
Exactly. Yes, we're not here to trade emotions, and I'm not here to say this is the greatest script. It's gonna just make loads of money. I'm sure it will sell. As I say, I'm here to help you have a better script, and to work a great deal on the craft, as well as to encourage your art.
I totally agree. I always kind of equate it to like being a blacksmith. Blacksmiths were incredible craftsmen. They worked on the project, and they still had that artistic motif about them. All right, so let's talk about, because we had mentioned scenes earlier, and one thing about making a good script great, the book, is scenes and structuring scenes. There's a lot of weight on there. And one thing I love is to kind of come in late to a scene and to leave early is a great way to kind of cut out that fat from a scene. And I was wondering, what kind of tips do you have for that?
Yeah, well, one is not to dally, and to know where you are heading with the scene. So there are scenes, that you're going to develop into a 3-act structure. And I often use the example, if you go back to Witness, the murder scene of the boy witnessing the murder is a perfect 3-act structure. The music helps clarify, which of course the director is doing. But also the action is, very clear and very well structured.
Yeah.
So looking at great scenes is a good way to learn, and then using a book. Like if you take Making a Good Script Great, and I talk about certain movies, then go look at the movie and say, okay, here's the book, and here's, I see. Okay, I get it. I'm learning this concept and how it works. So you're shaping. I mean, a lot of what you do as a writer is you shape the whole thing. You shape the scenes, you shape the scenes sequences. I mean, that's what art as a whole is shaping.
When I do a rewrite, I will do a specific technique. I'll say, this rewrite, I'm going to go through the entire script and just make sure the theme is there. And then another rewrite, I'm going to go through and make sure that there's subtext in the dialogue. Is there kind of a system that you recommend for when you get into the rewrite process?
I think that's a really good way of doing it. You mean, you might go through the whole script, and if you've had a script consultant that says, take out this scene, is take them out. I mean, leave them in another file so you can grab them again if you need to, but just follow and say, okay, let's get some of the cutting. I call it creating a vacuum so your creative process can come in and film in and fill in. And so you might actually want to say, I'm going to do a rewrite today where I'm just going to follow my main character. Now, it might take you a few days to actually look at all of that. And now I'm going to do a rewrite where I follow my main supporting. Now I'm going to do a rewrite just on the love story. Yeah. And so you take it apart. I had a client, really very experienced, very good client, come one time, and the script was optioned. And so we did that rewrite, and it took about 3 days to follow all the strands and say, we need another line here that's going to relate to that subplot. Right. And it's almost like a technical rewrite. Okay. Meaning you don't have to be overly creative. You're evaluating and assessing as opposed to making it up and letting it flow. And so you're always going back and forth.
So emotional shifts in a scene is something that you talk about. And I think that's really important. I've had clients come in and they'll say to me, look how much conflict is in the script. And then I'll read the script and it's 90 pages of two people yelling at each other the entire time. Yes. You know what I mean? And I'm like, there's no, this is like one note. So could you just discuss like shifting emotion within a scene and how that kind of keeps an audience?
Well, one thing is to make sure the scene has emotion.
Okay.
And one of my, actually my cousin who had been to a therapist said, there's the emotions of mad, glad, scared, and hurt.
Okay.
Those were the ones that she said. And I said, of course, each one of those, depending how mad are you?
Yeah.
Are you mildly irritated
Levels.
Or are you enraged? And so the more you can be aware of the shades of the emotion, and it's the same thing with an actor. I mean, a great director often says to the actor, just keep it low, just give us a little, maybe a movement of the lips, or, Anthony Hopkins he can just take this little muscle here and tell a whole world of, I'm a little scared right now. Say, I'm going to look at all my angry scenes and I'm going to see if I can get different dimensions.
And that I love that.
That might be what your rewrite is about. And we all have strengths and weaknesses. We want to write toward our strengths and keep working on our weaknesses. Wonderful. And being aware of when we overdo something.
It doesn't just have to be someone going from mad to sad to happy in the scene. It could be the acceleration of someone who's frustrated, growing into more angry, growing into an outburst, and then the coming down from that could be a really fascinating emotional journey. That's wonderful. So I know you have a new book out, right?
Yes. You're Talking to Me, which of course is a line from Taxi Driver.
Right.
How to Write Great Dialogue. And I co-wrote it with this very experienced screenwriter named John Marini. And because I had written a book called Writing Subtext, and I thought, I really want to write a book on dialogue. But as a script consultant, it felt to me like I really needed to write it with a screenwriter. And I spent about 8 years keeping my ears open. I thought, this is not something where I'm interviewing people for this job. I
Makes
just
sense.
have to meet somebody or know somebody that was the right person. And one of the things we did in this book that I think is such fun, at the end of every chapter, and there's chapters on, working with animals and aliens, there's chapters on dialogue, there's chapters on theme. We took half a page to a page from a client's screenplay with their permission, without their name, that had the problem that was discussed in the book.
Oh, cool.
And then I analyzed what was going on in their script that needed to be addressed. And then John rewrote it.
Oh, that's neat. So you see the process happen.
Yes. And one of them that was really good was a little section from a medieval, movie. And it was so flat and repetitive. John turned it into a Monty Python kind of medieval, and
great.
It is so funny. It's just hilarious. So there's great examples, of course, and there's examples from really great scripts. Plus, talking about the concepts of writing dialogue, things. The last chapter is called Red Flags, things not to do. Yeah. Like, please don't say yes. I said, if I see yes one more time in a screenplay.
Yeah. There's filler dialogue is what I like to call it, where it's it's a wasted line. I think that's great. I always find that dialogue is one of the last things a screenwriter can really start to master. So having a book dedicated on it is absolutely fantastic, because every line in a script matters, no matter if it is a descriptive action or the dialogue.
Yes. Yeah, it does. And I think we've covered, there's very few books on dialogue out there.
There are.
And I think we covered a lot of things that no other book talks about. And I think we did it in a sort of a different way. Plus, I think it's entertaining. There's some good stories in there too.
I mean, I can't wait to read it. I'm going to definitely check it out. Linda, thank you so much for being on this show. You are a treasure.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been great fun.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share in your social media, where you can tag us at The Successful Screenwriter.